My Own Stroke Experience and Relationships, to a Story of Handwriting with Dementia, number 1486, VPT Sharp 047, December 31, 2025. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category, Stroke, and Neuroscience. Preface. Several years ago, a story began circulating online, about a doctor working at a geriatric center in Kyoto. According to the story, Hiroshi Tanaka spent 8 years at a Kyoto geriatric center, tracking patients over age 80 who showed little or no cognitive decline. He initially expected explanations related to genetics or diet patterns. Instead, he reportedly identified one behavioral constant: they all wrote by hand for at least 15 minutes every day. Not typing, not texting, but physical pen on paper. Digital writing uses one brain pathway, he reportedly said. Handwriting activates 17. According to the story, MRI scans showed that handwriting forces the brain to coordinate motor control, spatial reasoning, and memory encoding at the same time. This creates what neurologists call cognitive load distribution. The brain cannot automate the task, so it remains fully engaged. Typing, by contrast, is described as muscle memory once learned. Writing is described as active thinking. That difference, the story claims, compounds over decades. Tanaka reportedly tested this idea in 120 adults aged from 65 with early memory loss. Half wrote journals by hand for 15 minutes daily, the other half typed. After 6 months, the handwriting group reportedly showed 41% better word recall, and 34% faster processing speed. Tanaka summarized it this way: the pen does not just record thoughts, it builds the infrastructure that holds them. The story further claims that large pharmaceutical interests attempted to suppress the study for 3 years. Internal emails allegedly expressed concern that non-pharmaceutical cognitive interventions could reduce dementia drug sales, projected at $16 billion by 2025. One executive reportedly wrote, "We cannot patent handwriting." According to the story, the research surfaced only after Tanaka retired, and released it to independent journals. The advice attributed to him is simple: write something by hand every day. Not grocery lists, but actual thoughts. 3 sentences about the day. 1 paragraph about a problem. Anything that forces the brain to translate abstract ideas into physical strokes. The story concludes with this message: this is not nostalgia. It is the difference between passively storing information and actively building the system that retrieves it. Disclaimer on social media science. This Kyoto story originated and circulated primarily through social media and informal online channels. Its specific details, including named individuals, quoted percentages, and claims of suppression, cannot be independently verified through peer-reviewed medical journals or formal clinical trials. Therefore, this story should not be treated as established scientific evidence or medical proof. Instead, it should be understood as an illustrative narrative that raises a plausible scientific question, not as a confirmed research finding. Introduction. I could not personally locate a peer-reviewed publication or official institutional record confirming the specific Kyoto story or its reported statistics. However, the broader scientific question is legitimate, because recent neuroscience research does show measurable differences in brain activity and cognitive task demands between handwriting and typing. Therefore, I decided to extend beyond the story and incorporate this question into my own research efforts. Why does this story matter? Even if it is not fully verified, whether every detail of the Kyoto story is accurate cannot be confirmed through formal scientific publications. It should not be treated as proof, and it should not be read as established clinical evidence. However, the story raises a reasonable and important question. Does handwriting engage the brain differently from typing? And could that difference matter for long-term brain health or recovery after injury? That question is legitimate, even if the story itself warrants further scrutiny, thought, debate, and research. To answer it responsibly, the story must be placed within a broader systems framework, rather than accepted at face value. A simple systems framework, the fluid-solid regime switch. In my medical research, I separate chronic disease, progression and recovery into 2 broad stages. The first stage is the fluid stage. Function remains adjustable. Processes are still adapting and responding to use. Improvement is possible. The second stage is the solid stage. Structural damage has occurred. Tissue is lost or scarred. Recovery becomes limited, and management replaces reversal. The transition between these 2 stages is what I call the fluid-solid regime switch. This framework applies not only to metabolic disease and stroke, but also to brain function, cognitive aging, and recovery. A common algorithm and computer software used for both regimes. Actually, in my viscoplastic medicine theory, VMT, calculations and analysis, I use the same mathematical model and algorithms for both the fluid dynamics and solid dynamics regimes. The differences lie mainly in how the results are illustrated and explained. The fluid perspective focuses on the flow characteristics of disease, development and progression, while the solid perspective focuses on rupture, collapse, and end-stage failure. Both my strain stress area diagrams and cumulative VMT energy curve diagrams primarily describe the fluid flow phase. In contrast, the stressor energy contribution ratios focus more on the relative contribution of different factors at the end stage of disease or failure. Handwriting and typing in the fluid stage. Handwriting and typing may appear similar, but they affect the brain differently. Typing is fast and efficient. Once learned, it becomes largely automatic. Fingers move with minimal conscious effort. This efficiency is useful, but it places relatively low demand on the brain after the skill is established. Handwriting, in contrast, is slower and less automatic. Each letter must be formed deliberately. The hand controls pressure and direction. The eyes guide movement. The brain must remain engaged throughout the task. From a fluid stage perspective, handwriting creates more active flow. It requires coordination, attention, and continuous adjustment. Typing creates less flow once it becomes routine. This does not mean typing is harmful. It means handwriting produces more useful stress, while the brain is still capable of adapting. Why effort matters before the fluid-solid regime switch. The brain follows a simple rule. What is used tends to be preserved, and what is not used tends to weaken. Effortful activities are especially important during the fluid stage. They slow decline and support adaptation. Passive activities, even if enjoyable, do not produce the same effect. Handwriting is effortful in a constructive way. It combines thinking, movement, and attention. It is difficult to automate completely. This does not mean handwriting prevents disease. It means it supports healthier neural flow before structural damage dominates. After stroke and the fluid-solid regime boundary. After a stroke, part of the brain has crossed into the solid stage. Tissue damage has occurred, and that damage cannot be undone. However, not all brain function becomes solid. Surrounding areas and connected neural networks often remain in the fluid stage. These regions can still adapt. Recovery depends on strengthening what remains fluid before further solid damage accumulates. Handwriting fits this goal well. It does not repair damaged tissue. Nothing can, but it can strengthen surviving pathways, improve coordination, and maintain attention through repeated use. In my own stroke recovery, I chose handwriting to record daily exercises and efforts in a notebook, not because of dramatic claims, but because it aligned naturally with this framework. A balanced and realistic view. Handwriting is not a cure. It does not reverse structural brain damage. It does not replace medical care, rehabilitation, or therapy. It is one supportive tool that operates upstream of the fluid-solid regime switch. Its value lies in timing, not in magic. The Kyoto story, whether fully accurate or not, points toward a basic truth that aligns with this framework. The brain remains healthier when it is actively used before irreversible damage dominates. From this perspective, handwriting is not nostalgia. It is a practical way to maintain flow, coordination, and engagement in the brain, while those properties remain adjustable. My personal experiences. During the past 5 years, I have applied the math-physics concept of viscoplastopology. VPT is viscosity plus plasticity, plus topology, to more than 800 biomedical research subjects, including over 200 neuroscience-related papers involving stroke and dementia. Through this work, I have become increasingly aware of subtle changes in my own cognitive function. After the initial 90 days of intensive stroke recovery efforts, I noticed that a small portion of my memory loss remaining may be related to post-stroke epilepsy. At the same time, my overall cognitive capability continued to improve. About 3 months after my stroke in June 2025, I began experiencing unexpected moments of recall. 2 academic subjects I had learned from 5 to 6 decades earlier resurfaced clearly, and I was able to apply them directly in my ongoing medical research. I also found myself remembering a song I used to sing at age 8, nearly 7 decades ago. These quiet but vivid moments of recovery offered a personal and tangible demonstration of the enduring power of neuroplasticity. Conclusion: the story of handwriting and dementia may never be fully validated in its original form. It may remain an imperfect narrative shaped by social media, rather than formal science. Yet its core question remains meaningful. Recovery and cognitive preservation are not governed solely by medications or isolated therapies. They are shaped by daily behaviors that influence how much of the brain remains fluid and adaptable before solid structural limits take over. Handwriting represents one such behavior. It is simple, low risk, and effortful in the right way. It does not promise reversal, but it supports engagement, coordination, and neural flow while recovery is still possible. From both a neuroscience systems perspective and personal experience, the value of handwriting lies not in dramatic claims, but in its quiet consistency. It encourages the brain to work, adjust, and remain active, one page at a time. This statement reflects my personal perspective, rather than an endorsement of the specific claims presented in the online social media story. In the end, the question is not whether handwriting can cure dementia or stroke. It cannot. The question is whether it helps preserve what remains adaptable, before time, and damage turn fluid processes into solid outcomes? That question is legitimate. Disclaimer: I write this article not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand health, prevent disease, and live better lives. This content is provided for educational reference only, and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this article freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights belong to the author. Gerald C.